Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Evoke Bike Podcast with James Piccoli. And this is a phenomenal one. James is a really smart guy. We're going to talk about his trajectory from local racing to becoming a World Tour pro. And he really talks about how there's just this fairy tale told about talent, potential, and progression. And there's a lot more to it to become a professional athlete. And what benchmarks did he use during some years when he wasn't getting the race results, but how does he define progress in that point in time? I think it's really awesome, too, to hear him and his viewpoint on this obsession with watts per kg. He talked about resilience, learning through his training as a self-coach athlete all the way until he became a pro in the World Tour, about learning what didn't work and then finding what did work. And he talks a little bit about some of the intervals he likes to do, how he looks at making the training applicable to his racing, and then what his general training philosophy is. At the end of the day, you can't have a big weakness and you need to minimize these, and he'll talk a little bit about how he does that. If you guys are listening on Apple, we would greatly appreciate if you could take 20 to 32 seconds out of your day and leave us a review if you think we deserve 5 stars. And please tell a friend about the podcast and interviews so more cyclists can use the knowledge that these amazing athletes are sharing with us to get better at whatever they're trying to accomplish on the bike. Hope you have a great week of training. We'll be back with part 2 later this week. Have a great day. And James, thank you. This is incredible. And so where are you now?
I'm back at home, quote unquote, in Andorra.
Okay.
So I have my residency here for a couple of reasons. One of which is that right now it's actually one of the only places where I can get a visa to live, and which is quite useful. But 2 is they really like athletes here, and so they make it kind of easy to get residency, and then I never have to worry about like renewing visas or anything like that, or stressing about work visas or anything, because was a Canadian resident until 2 months ago, and people can have problems with getting turned around at borders and stuff if you don't have all your ducks in a row. So now I should be good.
I'm sure that's somewhat of a complex process. What's the long story short on that? So it's like, hey, I'm on this World Tour team. I need to live somewhere in Europe. Andorra will welcome me, and that's where I'm going.
So it's actually quite complicated. It's something that no one really about, because it's complicated for non-Europeans. So in a nutshell, the problem is that, let's say before now, I was a Canadian citizen working for an Israeli registered company in Europe. So no one knows what that is, and you're an athlete on top of all that. So you're technically working all over the world, so it's a big mess. But Andorra has this system for high level athletes. So it's there's 60 guys here now, 60 World Tour guys here.
Okay.
They just make it easy to get residency if you're a foreigner, and then you don't have to worry about coming in and out of Europe.
Okay. I see. I didn't even know about Schengen. And went, I was getting my master's in upstate New York, actually close to where we raced. And I was going over to Belgium for 3 months. And I'm like, oh, this is sick. I'm going to go for 120 days, get everything set up, Airbnbs, tickets. And someone's like, dude, you got 90 days. And I was like, wait, what? And so I had to go. I mean, it was a great thing that I quote unquote had to do. I went to Croatia, and then I went to Scotland to get out and come back in. And it just quickly became sort of a sticky situation. So I can only imagine what that's like when you're racing, training, trying to be like you said, a Canadian working for an Israeli team in Europe. That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you for doing this. Been following your path, and if we could maybe, I kind of want to jump into some racing things first, and then do some training stuff, and then if we have time, just a couple questions on nutrition and mindset. Sure. If that sounds good to you.
Whatever you think is interesting.
Dude, well, this is going to be super interesting. So I can't remember when I started seeing your name, but I think your progression for any athlete that's going to watch this, that's trying to get to your level, or even taking it down a step, an athlete like myself So come up, you know, category 5 through 1. One's where I'm going to be an amateur. But when athletes start to get to that like cat 3, cat 2 level, when everyone's getting closer in competition and you start going to like bigger regional races, I think a lot of people get shook. Like they're the big fish in their town. Then they go and get 50th at like Catskills or some race. And they're like, oh, wait, I'm actually not that good. And I'm really like, as I started looking back through your results and kind of your trajectory, I want to hear how you sort of see things. And maybe I have this, I'm looking back, I'm like, holy crap, I raced James in 2011. You were 19 years old. Hugo Huel won that race, which was like badass. So I started looking through and I want to more like humanize you to other athletes so they can get motivated by your path. Like it's not like you were this 19-year-old kid who went to Green Mountain and won everything. Like you've clearly took some knocks, and that's not a diss, but just so like athletes can hear, like everyone sees you now on the podium at Rwanda. They're like, oh dude, James is doing Vuelta last year. You already won a race this year. Like they see all the amazing things that you're doing now, but it's easy to forget all the freaking work you've put in. Yeah. So I look back and you're like 21 to 24, let's say in the 2012 to 14 range, you're doing races like Green Mountain, Killington. You're not smashing people. You're not showing up and just riding away from guys, but you're doing good enough that you get a pro contract with Amoravida in 2014. And then you go to Elevate in 2017. But if people look back, like you might have been riding for guys in 2015, 2016, but you're getting like your mid-pack at Gila. Maybe again, you're riding for somebody else. But you're like, what was your process? Because then it seemed like, and I could be wrong, this 2017 something clicks. You're top 10 at Alberta, 3rd at Snow Basin in Utah. 2018, now you're top 10s at Colorado Classic. Like you're coming into your own, it seems like, as a outsider looking back. Can you kind of walk us through that process of, I mean, it's a endurance sports. It's a grind. It's putting in that work day after day. But how do you see that as the athlete that we only see you now as like, holy crap, it's James Piccoli?
Yeah. Yes, I think you nailed it on the head. And it's very much a Western thing. North America in particular has this obsession with talent, potential, and progression. So, and it's like, it's almost like a fairy tale, you know, it's this romantic idea that you try something for the first time and you're amazing at it. And like, that's how you know that that's what you're meant to do. You know, it's almost like the Prince Charming story. Like there's one person, there's one woman, one man for you out in the world. And like, when you find them, you know, and it clicks, and it's perfect. Mm-hmm. It's a very romantic idea that's what talent is, because it's a very easy concept to understand. You know, like you're either good at something or you're not. In my experience with professional cycling and a lot of other aspects of my life and a lot of other athletes that I see coming up, it's essentially the complete opposite. So at 21, effectively, I was a cyclist. I wasn't particularly good. I just enjoyed riding my bike, and I enjoyed going to school almost not at all. And I decided one day, and I used the word decided on purpose, that I was going to be a professional cyclist. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know the path. I didn't know what I needed to do. I didn't know, you know, I had a rough idea of the work that was going to be involved and kind of some rough steps, but I had no plan. But I said, you know what, I'm going to train and I'm going to dedicate myself over the next however long it's going to take. And I'm going to be a professional cyclist because that's what I want to do. Because I enjoy it. I like riding. I like training. And that's when the journey started, you know, so was I good when I first started cycling? Not really, you know, like, I enjoyed myself. I trained. I loved training. I loved the process of improving, which means, you know, like working hard for small gains, you know, the process of getting better, of learning, of training, of dialing in nutrition and everything I need to do to become a better cyclist.
What are some benchmarks along the way that you use to see progression? Because sometimes it's hard to explain this to athletes, like, especially when an athlete, let's use a classic example of 20-minute power. They might not be able to really conceptualize at first in their first year or two of training, like, okay, I'm doing X watts, but then they can do X watts twice. That's not as cool as if they can go tell their friend they can do X plus 20 watts. But doing X twice is just as good, the repeatability. What kind of things were you using along your way? Like, hey, I'm getting better at this. Or was it just race results maybe?
So that's actually the most interesting part of my story. So when you went through my progression, there's a big gap in between 2014 and 2017. There's 3 years where you're like, well, what's going on? And essentially in those 3 years, what was happening was that I was doing all this work to get better, all this training, all this reading, all this racing, as much as I could. But measuring that progress was very difficult. And I kind of had to have faith that what I was doing would pay. But it's not always easy to measure that. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that, like I said, is just faith, just blind faith that if you continue to work at something, that you're going to get better. And it's very difficult when externally it doesn't seem like there are improvements. So you said I didn't really have any results there. During 3 years of dedication and hard work and essentially 100% commitment to cycling. And, not to be pretty blunt, like you have nothing to show for it. Mm-hmm. But that's the period in my cycling career that I'd like to, if you use the analogy of like a plant growing, they say the first 3 years of like a tree is all the roots growing. And you don't see anything from the surface. And it's very easy to say like, oh, I'm watering this plant and I'm feeding it and fertilizing and all this stuff. And there's nothing showing, like what's going on. And those are all the roots growing. So that's the whole base of where I learned to be resilient, where I learned to be self-sufficient, where I learned to dial in my training, like all the things that you actually need to be a professional athlete that aren't the sexy things there. It's not watts per kilo. It's not the race results. All the character traits you need to be a professional athlete, I developed in those 3 years. And a lot of that was because of struggles, the struggles of not finding a team, not being able to find a team or not getting race results for whatever reason, or, having nothing to show for all the work that I put in. All the struggles that come along with the journey, that period of my cycling career was essentially where I became a professional athlete, but not in the sexy way that everyone, like, oh, he beat all these guys and that's when he showed he was like really ready. Like that happens before, it's not just, again, that's like a romantic kind of Hollywood movie thing, but in reality, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of struggle. It takes a lot of failure, and it takes the mental skills to keep at it despite everything externally telling you to call it quits.
Dude, if I did outtakes, that's the outtake right there, man. You just like drop the Bible on people's face. I love it, James. So I have a few questions for that. What you had mentioned, the training and reading. What things were you reading that helped you grow into this athlete that you've become?
Essentially 24 hours of my day since I decided that I was going to be a professional cyclist, I devote to improving my craft. So what do I read? I read studies, physiology. I read books on leadership, and I read, books on other athletes to see their paths. I read. I read stuff with the goal of being a better athlete by the end of the book. So there's lots of stuff you can read. Even just reading about another athlete's journey, just a good biography. And seeing that like I said, the reality of most people's stories is struggle and failure. Like you only see them when they're winning races or having success in whatever sport it is, that because that's the nature of professional sport. But you don't see the 10 years, the 10,000 hours of struggle and failure before that.
Dude, so true. So true.
So yeah, read everything from, I really like reading about physiology. I essentially, until I got to the world tour where you're mandated to have a coach, I never had a coach. I did all my training myself. So I read about training physiology, about the science, about different methods, tried them out, learned what worked for my body, what worked nutritionally, training wise. Again, just doing everything I could to improve in my craft, beyond the sexy things of watts per kilo. Everyone's obsessed with watts per kilo now.
Yeah, dude, thank you. But people can talk about it, but I think it was like Cyrus Monk was on here, the Australian U23 national champion. He was like, it's just people don't talk about what can they do at the end of a 4-hour road race, which is what really matters. And I love metrics. I love the power meter. I just think sort of kind of what you said before of we're in this culture too, where it's like, well, here's your 16-week plan to boost your FTP. And that's training. I'm like, guys, like, it's not that easy. If it was that easy, everybody would be amazing. Like, it's this lifestyle that you have to embrace if you really want to become your best self, whether someone's trying to become a pro or if somebody wants to, go from the B group on the local Tuesday night ride to the A group. Like, and with, I think social media is great. I love it, but it's so easy for us to look at the graphs of the other person. I'll hear athletes be like, oh, well, I saw so-and-so did this 20-minute test. I can't do those watts. Like, I'm going to lose this race. And I'm like, wait, do you really think a 20-minute test is going to be determinant of the race? I know a lot of really fast people that suck at bike racing. It's Justin Williams was like, oh, just so people understand, like, there's watts and then there's this thing called bike racing. Like, they both matter in the result sheet. So speaking of results, which ones are you the most proud of?
Oh, which ones am I the most proud of? I get Tour of Utah 2019 was the result I was the most proud of. So I won the prologue and I finished second overall. And remember when I alluded to those 3 years where I didn't really have much going on externally? At the end of those 3 years, what essentially brought me out of those 3 years was a call on my phone that I didn't know. I didn't know who was calling me. It was an unknown number, which I never answer, by the way. But this time I decided to answer. And it was a guy by the name of Paul Abrahams who runs Elevate Pro Cycling. And he said to me, I've been watching you, I've seen you at races. I really believe in you. We just got invited to the Tour of Utah. So this was like halfway through the season I'd love for you to come to the Tour of Utah. And of course I'd heard of the Tour of Utah and I was almost in disbelief. I almost didn't believe him that he was going to the race because I knew it was a big race. And I'm like, of course are you sure? First of all, are you sure you're going to the Tour of Utah? Second of all, of course I'd love to go to the Tour of Utah. And he said, okay, great, because I really see you winning that bike race one day. He said that to me essentially before I joined the team. And so to go through that whole journey with him and that team, and essentially for that to come true, I won the prologue, had the yellow jersey, and ended up finishing second overall. But that was just such a full circle moment, because literally the first conversations I had with him, he was like the first kind of director to believe in my ability, first external person in cycling to believe in me. And he said that I could win the Tour of Utah, and I really nearly did.
Was that more motivation or pressure when he told you that? Because I mean, this is like a big call at that moment for you.
Honestly, at that point, I kind of didn't believe him. So it was neither, because it was almost like, okay, man, like you don't, that's a big ask. And
Huge.
At that point, I didn't even see it for myself, because I had a very kind of bumpy path to get to that point, and no one really in cycling had believed in me besides myself. And so to have someone say that was almost like, I almost like brushed it off, like, sure, so it was neither.
How do you keep that belief, when it is, you have that period of years, or to the other cyclist that's going to watch this, it's going and they're getting 40th and 50th. It's like, maybe I'm just not that good at it. How do you find that belief? Is it going back to the continue to work hard, improve your craft, find another way to get better, whether it's each book or each training ride, and you just have to slog onward?
Yes. So yes is the answer to that question. You just have to keep going. But recognize that, even I came pretty close to quitting. So before I got that call that I just told you the story about, I had really no team, no measurable forward progress in cycling, and I had been working for 3 or 4 years, and so even for me, it got to the point where, like, I wasn't making any money cycling. I invested 3 to 4 years of my life 100% into something, and externally I had nothing to show for it. And so I think what athletes have to recognize is that almost everyone gets to that point where they're like, maybe this is not going to work out. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't have the talent, whatever it is. And maybe it's just, maybe I got to do something else. And that's okay, because every athlete has that moment. I read literally 2 days ago or yesterday about Taco Vanderhoorn, who won Stage of Zero. And he said, I almost quit cycling last year, because didn't have a contract, and, figured that was it for me, figured that I'd done what I need to do, didn't work out, and then goes and wins the Stage of Zero a year later. So I'd say to those people who are going through that experience that, everyone, I've had that, and plenty of almost every other successful athlete has had that moment, and I genuinely think the only skill that I have genuinely is like resilience. Like I don't think I'm particularly talented genetics wise. I don't think I have any special gifts for cycling, to be honest. I just haven't given up. I've just continued to go. And I've continued to try and get better every day. And that's the only reason why I'm here now.
Stephen Bassett called himself the cockroach that cycling can't kill. And I think it's you guys that just keep going back and you take knocks. And I always wonder when athletes that it's really funny that you bring this up. As I was looking back through roadresults.com and I'm looking through your old amateur results and I'm seeing names so I was in Rochester, so I'm seeing old Canadian names that used to come down, guys in the Northeast. And I'm like, man, that dude was such a hitter. Like, I really looked up and like respected that person. They quit in 2014. So-and-so quit in 2013. And I'm always wondering, like, did they just lose the love and they just decided like life took them elsewhere, which is cool? Or was it like they kind of got stagnant, started doubting their progression and were just like, meh, I'm good. And because it's very interesting to think of on a, I guess, macro scale. When people zoom out and look at the forest, we all do hit that. A teammate of mine really got me remotivated. I kind of was in upstate New York doing the same races. I sort of, I'm like, God, is my life going to be cycling? Like, all my friends know me as like the cyclist, and just kind of kept trucking along, and then moved to Tennessee, reignited some gravel, kind of got me excited. Roads kind of making a different resurgence, and you find your way back into it. Everyone finds their own different. Lawrence Tendam was talking about it. It's really interesting to hear you bring that up. I almost want to start asking people that question. Like, have you ever felt like cycling maybe you were at your end point? That's interesting, man. I appreciate you sharing that and being candid kind of with the journey. And the last comment on this racing, like, to highlight it, you win Gila in 2019, which is a massive win. For maybe it wasn't your number one result that in your mind, but someone should look back and see what you're doing in 2015 and 2016, and it's a totally different cyclist, and that's so freaking motivating, dude. Like, just to see a guy like you putting in the work and coming out with, I mean, anybody that wants to be a climber knows what Gila is and knows what a beast that thing is. It's freaking incredible, James. So self-coaching, let's talk about training a little bit, because I know athletes that watch this are super interested in what other people are doing. What did your training consist of as you're coming up? Let's look at it maybe two ways, 2015 to 2017, and then have things changed now you kind of went world tour from Elevate. I was going to ask you early versus you later, then versus you with a coach.
Okay, so me early was essentially trying everything, trying every style of training, reading about training, just kind of figuring out what worked for me, what worked for my body. And in saying that, essentially it's making mistakes, like learning what didn't work is actually the way it worked. Yeah. So I tried a whole bunch of stuff.
What are some of those things? What are some of those things that didn't work for you? Not that we're knocking anything, but just what wasn't for James.
Yeah. So when I first got onto a kind of team with, I don't want to call him coach. He was, anyway, it was recommended that I do like, low cadence drills, and like specific heart rate targets, just kind of like very old school European kind of training. Didn't work for me, and especially didn't work for my brain, because I'm a pretty analytical and data driven guy, and if you don't explain why I'm doing something, I have a really hard time taking it on board. So this particular guy was just saying, "Oh, do it because that's what the Euros do," and where I'm someone who's like, I want to hear about the pathways and like the studies and like explain to me why this works. Anyway, tried a whole bunch of training styles. I ended up, which I still use today. I find for me the most effective method of training is polarized training. So to brief descriptor of what that is, it's either you ride very, very easy or very, very hard. And obviously you do most of your riding very, very easy.
Can you define easy for somebody if they're like, "Oh, I want to try this now"?
Easy is, so the problem I see 98% of people making is that easy is really medium and hard is medium. So easy, when I say easy, it's like being able to have a conversation with someone and just like enjoying being outside. And
we got a lot of data people, so I'm gonna 65% FTP cruising.
Yes, even less. Like I don't know, between 200 and 250 watts for me.
Okay.
Which is really just like you can ride with normal people who are not racers, and you're not making them suffer. There's this, which I wish it would stop, this, I don't know what even the right word is, trope that like cycling is linked with endless suffering. And somehow that's like noble and good. And while there's a place and time to push yourself, like it shouldn't be all the time. And you don't need to suffer all the time to get better.
I also to add onto that as my own thing that every cyclist that's trying to make it is making sacrifices, and I'm like, dude, you're riding a bike, you're making choices to try and become a pro athlete. Like, dude, just drive something in me. I'm like, you're not sacrificing. Please, you're not a martyr.
No one forcing you to do this.
Right.
That's the difference. Like actual suffering, I'm sure if you look up the definition, is you don't choose when it starts and ends. Like if someone has a disease, they're suffering. you're using discomfort to increase your fitness. It's not the same thing. But anyway, so yeah.
So that's the easy.
And then above 400 to and up.
What types of sorry, I'm going to be super micro on this. What kind of sessions would those be? Like, 400 and up is a big range for people. Are you doing like 6 by 3 minutes? Are you mixing it up? Are you doing 30 on, 15 off?
It really, so I try and as much as I can, and this is, I'll allude to this when you say later, James, like World Tour now. But when I have time to fully prepare for an event, I try and tailor a little bit to the needs of the event. So for example, I would look at a course like Tour of the Gila, and I would say, where am I likely to make the difference in terms of time on GC? So you have whatever it was, a 15-minute climb to Mogollon. You have a time trial, which is about 30 minutes of kind of rolling hills. And then you have a hard last day with a long climb, medium climb, long climb, and then short climb at the end. And so I'll take those kind of those efforts that I need to be good at, and I'll find a way to kind of sharpen for that. So let's say if I want to be good for a 5-minute climb, I'll train, a little bit less than 5 minutes. So my intervals will be a little bit less than 5 minutes, and then also just a little bit more. So you hit both sides of that power band. If you're doing a longer climb, then you're doing more kind of around threshold. So you want to do a little bit more than that and a little bit less than that. And you want to do, a situation where you have attacks. So you have little peaks. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can do, like you said, micro intervals, 30 seconds. You can do steadier with little sprints. There's a lot of ways you can. But essentially the way I look at training, my general training philosophy is less, it's like developing skills. If you ask a violinist, like, how do you get better at violin? They're going to say, well, you need to practice the songs you're going to play. You need to practice scales. You need to practice this and that, and playing for long. Like, for whatever reason, cyclists have become obsessed with FTP, and they think that FTP determines your worth as a cyclist and your strength at every type of effort and every race situation and all that. When in reality, to get results at a bike race, you have to have skills. And some of those skills are power for a certain amount of time, whether that's short sprints, whether that's accelerating out of corners, whether that's short climbs, steep climbs, long climbs, going fast on a flat out of a corner in a criterium. Like, these are all skills that you need to do, you need to work on to improve at your craft. And that's my general training philosophy. Like I said, the thing that tends to work for me the most is polarized training. But in reality, most of the way I think about training is developing skills.
And in developing skills, would you say variation in those skills so that you don't have a massive hole in your armor? Like, you don't want to be a 10, 10, 10, and then there's 2 at something. Be a 9, 9, 8, and 7. Is that sort of accurate?
Yeah. So that's another part of my experience that I wish I could share with, especially people coming out from North America, because this is and it's mainly because obviously a lot of guys don't have experience racing in Europe, but there's this fallacy that you have to decide what kind of bike racer you are, and you're good at climbing, so you're a climber, or you're good at sprinting, so you're a sprinter, or you are a time trialist, or whatever it is. Because you see that in the Grand Tours, and you figure okay, if I'm racing in North America, I have to pick a kind of specialty too, and then I'll develop into that. But when you get to Europe and you actually start racing good bike racers is you learn that everyone here is good at everything. Nobody has any weaknesses. And if you have a weakness, whatever it is, it's going to get exposed and you're going to get buried for it. So even the purest climbers that you see like in the Grand Tours can ride really fast on the flat, and they can sprint, and they can descend, and they can do everything they need to do to minimize their weaknesses. And that's the reason why I'm saying is because people get into this, into this belief system that they need to be a climber, and I don't need to work on my sprint because I'm going to do well in the climbing races and I'm going to be a climber. But to be honest, to make it out of North America and to make it as a bike racer in Europe, you need to be good at everything, everything. So I know it sounds ridiculous to say, if you want to win Gila, you need to also be able to like mix it up in sprints. But it's true. And that's the way you're going to get to the next level in Europe, because as soon as you have a weakness in yours, it's exposed and people take advantage of it.
Dude, you got to try and become bulletproof. And it's, man, this is such a good podcast, James.
Okay, everybody, that does it for part 1 with James Piccoli. Definitely come back later this week and stay tuned for part 2 as we just dive more into training, more into all the nitty gritty. James is clearly a super smart guy that has assessed a lot about his capabilities, weaknesses, how to address them. And I think he really drops a lot of gems that we can all use to our own training and racing to become a better athlete. So James, thank you for part 1. We will talk to you all soon. Have a great day.